Welcome to the Parks and Recreation Workshop. If you look at the front page of the website, you probably saw a rough agenda. It's just an agenda for us to chat a bit about Parks and Rec. The purpose of a workshop is really to inform the board and to, at least on an informal basis, to chat about what our goals are in regards to a particular subject, in this case Parks and Recreation, and a little bit more specifically about the town beach this evening. The goal of workshops, like I said, is to inform us, so we don't take any formal votes. I have been trying to encourage public participation at meetings on Zoom, and so what I'll do is at least a few times during the meeting pause and ask if people have input or questions on items. So I'll do that multiple times. But to start, the board will probably be in discussion with each other to some extent. So we did have a warrant article in June that talked about this particular subject, and Eric, you had that for us, and if you could just share the wording of that. This is really only partially what we're discussing tonight, but it is a part of that we need to bear in mind.
So the article was Article 11, and it did pass 655 to 185 with 15 blank, just for context. And the article reads, shall the town of Readfield vote to make the use of the Readfield Town Beach free to Readfield residents beginning January 1, 2021, with supporting revenue to come from property taxes, program fees, rentals, and other sources as deemed to in the best interest of the town? Question mark.
And as Eric read that, he did read the vote up front. Dennis is joining us in just a second here. He did read the vote total. So this was actually one of the warrant articles that was overwhelmingly passed by a very healthy margin. So in terms of vision for the Parks and Rec, which encompasses the beach and what we see going forward, I'll just try to broaden that a little bit to say that my goal certainly is to see a Parks and Rec department, if you will. And when I say department, I don't want people to get the idea that this is a large endeavor that's brand new. It's more of it's more of a way of discussing the different various feeding aspects of what might be in Parks and Recreation. It's not, our intent is not to create a huge entity at this point, or at least my intent is not to do that. But I do see us fairly focused on the beach. We do need to work out a system that allows usage levels that are smart and so forth. And I do see us eventually perhaps trying to do more things that might be outdoors, or even a trip, for example, for people to, older citizens perhaps, a bus trip to like the flower market in Portland or something like that. So I see those, it is part of a broader activity. I do know that from COVID, the situation that we're in now, people have made great use of our trails and facilities and our library. And so there's demand, if you will, and certainly from the vote, there's demand that we see for these kinds of services. And that's what people expect as part of the way of life in Readfield, I believe. So with that, I really want to ask my fellow board members, and then we'll ask people who are in the public what their thoughts are on just the vision. And again, this is just to share ideas. Who would like to start? Hi, Ralph.
Hello, Bruce. Better late than never.
You're always here. Would any board members like to speak to the... Dennis, if you unmute. Yes, please.
Hi, yes. Bruce, I just want to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about, what's that?
I said,
I'm
oh
just
man, that is a
impressed
beautiful
with you.
background.
I'm in beautiful Cumston Hall is where I am there. So, but I just want to take an opportunity to tell you a little bit about why I think what my view is here from one perspective and one perspective only. And it just, and it's something else I've done for the town. When I am involved in the organization of Heritage Days, I have found that we all want the same thing. We want the best day for Readfield possible. And sometimes it feels like there is a better way that we can get in touch or at least communicate with three departments that I think are invaluable to our town. And sometimes I wish there was a unified voice that could speak on behalf of these things, because I think all of these groups that we're talking about, conservation, trails, and rec, have the same thing in common. Give the people of Readfield a good experience. And whether or not it's the kids playing sports, or whether or not it's the people on trails, or whether it's not it's conserving land and making sure that it stays protected, I think all of those things make basically are for the common good of Readfield. And having one sort of one unified board, whether or not it was a representative from each separate group or whatever, but being able to do that from a planning standpoint would be really great, because then what we could do is we could have all of those three things be on display for Heritage Days, which I think is a celebration of the best parts of Readfield. And I think the trails are one of the best parts of Readfield. I think the beach is one of the best parts of Readfield. And so for my part, the idea of bringing this together in a more efficient way isn't really creating another position or any department. It's consolidating and making more efficient three important things. And the one caveat I'll just add is, sometimes when you talk about these things, people get real mad about their corner of the sandbox. And what I just want to encourage is, again, I don't think anyone's losing a voice. We're just coming together to work together more efficiently, which I'm always for. So when it comes to things like this and great resources of Readfield, I want to see all these folks working together rather than on an island.
Thank you, Dennis. Other board members? Chris, Ralph, or Catherine, anything? Members of the public, you're welcome to chime in on this. What do you expect the select board to be building in its vision moving forward with Parks and Rec? Would anybody like to speak?
Yes, I'd like to ask Dennis a question for clarification.
Please.
Do you see this new entity as one committee or commission that's responsible for trails, conservation, and the beach, or do you see this as something that facilitates collaboration among the three existing committees or commissions?
Marty, thank you. I think that's a great question. And if I understand what you're saying is, do I envision a sort of a representative board that makes decisions through a person, or do I envision something or like a park helping facilitate with those three together still? Is that correct, Marty?
Yes.
Okay. The short answer is I don't know the structure. I can't answer that. In my mind, I think it could work. In my mind, I think it has to be a new approach to these same things. So if that means a board that has a representative from the conservation, or the trails and the rec department, so that they could all work together. That's fine. I'm all for facilitating, collaboration, Marty, but sometimes there's just the rubber doesn't hit the road. And sometimes you get into these situations where we all want this to happen, but because there is one holdup in whatever, individual reasoning it is, it bogs the whole thing down. And so what I don't know exactly how to facilitate more collaboration. I'm sure that's happening now, but I just envision it having a more centralized and unified heart.
Catherine, please.
So I guess maybe this is the elephant in the room. I almost think that cemeteries might be included under an umbrella organization here because a lot of people seem to recreate in the cemeteries. They have nice walking paths and people come to town to look for heritage there. And then our trail system ties into some of those. So I think that the question is, are we going to continue to have separate boards with their own separate leadership and separate budgets? Or are we looking to combine this so that we have a department with a budget that might have branches under it that feed into a total?
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph, if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, from my perspective, the relevant boards in question individually right now, to my mind, what I can see, are doing a great job. I'm not sure that consolidation enhances their service. Perhaps some sort of an ombudsman enterprise to more closely coordinate the workings of the relevant groups would be helpful, but I don't think that that an umbrella board necessarily streamlines things, and to my mind, might actually compromise the effectiveness of the individual boards. I thought that the primary discussion we were going to be having tonight was Park and Rec and how we were going to move that enterprise from a fee-supported organization to a basically a tax-based enterprise that could maybe broaden reach and maybe expand the scope of what that particular board does. Certainly, it makes sense to consider the offerings of all those related groups together in some fashion, but frankly, I don't buy into the notion that that a single board with individual branches is the most effective way to go. And I think in terms of budget purposes and analyzing the actual costs for each one of these units, that cost to benefit structure will get lost if you consolidate. Things will get lost in the muddle, so to speak.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Bruce Hunter, please.
Bruce, you're muted.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment whenever there's time.
Sure, Bruce and then Greg. Yeah.
Yeah. On the Conservation Commission, we have two members of the Trails Committee. So there's an overlap there. And I think that that might be the best way to handle this. You don't create a whole new organization. You might have a board. The three chairs from the three organizations might get together occasionally. But the key thing is that you've got members of each group overlapping. So during a meeting, you can discuss some of their issues, vice versa. And it works pretty well with the Trails and the Conservation Commission where we have an overlap of two members.
Thank you, Bruce. Greg?
Apologies. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was kind of spoiled growing up as a kid because I lived in this very vibrant, tight-knit, socially engaged, and fun community. and maybe it was the times, because I'm going to take you back to the 1960s, and it was a lake, maybe a 5-acre lake with a couple of beaches. And we had this little clubhouse, and none of it was owned by the town. It was owned by an organization called the United Owners Association. And what happened with these little tiny facilities was there was movies at the clubhouse on, I think, Friday nights or Thursday nights. There were dances at the clubhouse for teenagers and kids. They also had some ball fields and nothing spectacular, just a 4 or 5 acre parcel. They also ran a little summer camp at this little clubhouse. And I'm telling you, this was not a beautiful facility by any stretch of the imagination. But, and so the summer camp was for basically kids K through 8, and it was run by high school kids, and they all got paid as counselors. They also did a winter games on the lake. And again, this is a little 5-acre puddle. And it was just a bunch of people that got together and made things happen. And so I guess my comments here are, we have so many of these great disparate facilities in town. And I think what's lacking from my perspective is sort of a vision and some direction. And I guess for me, it's kind of like, I want to be in a vibrant, tight-knit, socially engaged and fun community. And I think most people do too. The question is, how do we do that? And there may be some opportunities here. I think the Grange Hall or something is for sale. I'm not sure. I'm not suggesting that any of this even has to be done by the town. It could be some sort of private group that gets together that has some energy and vision that might draw other people of like minds to do something like that, so we can have sort of people that talk to real people in real time and in the same space, and get back to some, I don't know, socially engaged activities that are fun. And so, yes, we have the trails, we have the Conservation Commission. I'm on both of them. Also happen to be on the fire department. But I guess that's my thought. When I come to something like this, we're looking at combining the energies of these different groups. There's probably a way to do that can generate some energy and some excitement. That's all I got.
So I think, again, the purpose of this is we're not going to create a vision tonight because that should be more process driven. But I think the board has heard some good feedback on this. I really don't want to say this, but I will. I kind of agree with everybody a little bit. And so I think that's going to be the purpose is moving forward, is picking and choosing how we can build the collaborative environment for these to happen. And I'm not sure who mentioned about the 3 chairs perhaps falling into a little bit more of a coordination group, maybe on a quarterly basis or something of that nature. That makes a lot of sense to me too. And that may be, and I'll wrap this up so we can move on. But that may be an initiative that we start with. And we may let this develop on a more organic and natural basis, if you will, as we go forward. I do think there are some stark differences between the committees in terms of there may be a lot of strong backs and trails, and there may be a very different kind of job that people in recreation enjoying working directly with kids have. And so it's very important to me that we create the basis for those volunteers to come together and feel that they're working together as a group. And so the last thing I want to do is try to create a committee of 25 people, so we preserve all those volunteers in a large group that won't be coordinated as well. We do want to talk a little bit about funding. There are 3 parts of the funding that we've put on the agenda tonight, which is the initial year, 21, 22, subsequent years, and capital plans. And this is merely, I want to be very careful and have people understand that this is merely discussion of direction only. So there's not anything we're going to take from tonight that's a hard and fast way in terms of funding Parks and Rec that won't go through the budget process, won't be considered by the public, and so on and so forth. But I think the board, with the vote on the beach in particular, and a little later we'll talk about the beach in particular, I think the board needs to make sure that it supports that warrant article from last year. So initial year 21-22, I'll just start off by just simply stating that some members of the board, I'm not going to represent it as all, but I think it is all to a certain degree, are concerned about the economic situation at large, and our tendency is to be very smart with our budget next year in a way that is respectful and sensitive. You may have seen I said something of that nature in the paper. Sensitive to taxpayers, and at the same time strives to, move our community forward. So with that, I would just simply say that in the preliminary year of 21-22, I see us doing two things primarily. And I do want to hear from board members, and Marty's here from the budget committee too. He overlaps with that committee, so his thoughts are certainly welcome, and anybody else. But we'll start with board members. But I see 21-22 as primarily reallocation of resources. How do we better coordinate some of those resources? I don't think we want to be putting a lot of new money in next year. And I think we also should be looking at, and this kind of speaks perhaps a little bit to what Greg was mentioning, we do want to look into partnership opportunities and grant opportunities in particular. So there may be some startup pieces that we can do that would evolve in that direction. So I will shut up now, ask my fellow board members to chime in on any part of the funding, whether it's capital or subsequent years or the initial year. And then I'll ask the public if they would like to chime in on this. Any board members? Yes, Catherine, please.
So I'll just strike out bold. I know we have talked about having a director or a coordinator or a facilitator, whatever title you want to give them, that could do things like run swim lessons, coordinate. Eric, you had a position at the beach this past year. We've had a different kind of position over the last several years. Someone who's in charge of things, can answer questions for folks, and is the direct connection to Eric for management in terms of labor. And so I think that's an important component of what we're doing. There are some capital issues that need to be addressed on the sooner side, and there are some capital needs that need to be planned for. I think it would be great if during this budget process we could have a 5-year plan. We've had people come to us and ask about building a basketball court. We've talked about having a flagpole and kind of garden out at the ball field. Someone mentioned tonight possibly having a building. There was a time when we first started the park behind the library and it got that first little trail going before it was connected to anything else, where we went from the library up and over to the former Grange. I don't know if that building has any particular use for the town or to a group, but that's something we should talk about and toss around. I think we need to know the big picture, especially maybe from Sean, who I think is part of the beach recreation department, of what their vision is. Swing sets, climbing structure, anything that needs to be done to the beach front in terms of erosion control, those kinds of projects. Eric, did we get the electricity put in this year, or is that coming in the spring?
That's going to be in the spring, and I'll talk in a little bit about some of the things that I've seen, and I do have a draft budget that I don't want to get into the details on because that'll ruin this discussion, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. But a few projects have been accomplished, but a few more than I like have been put us off a bit because of the pandemic and other factors. But we do have some identified capital projects. And actually this year we have $4,000 in the budget to do some of that significant work with the re-roofing of those picnic shelters and the electricity, getting it to the other side of the driveway, which is, a small step, but a big improvement at the facility. But yeah, so those are two big items that we should be accomplishing this spring, all things coming together as they should.
Thank you. And I kind of like to see if we can make this bigger sort of umbrella group. And maybe if we have a director, facilitator, coordinator, they could be that go-between who sits on each of the committees and can really, have a pulse of what's happening everywhere. I love the idea of maybe making committee positions that's when you get appointed, you're appointed as a trails and conservation person for a 3-year term, or you're appointed as trails and rec, so that people know that there's this connection that we're building. Where was I going with this?
Connection's a good thing, there's no question.
I'll come back to you, Catherine. I want to see if other board members have something. Do any other board members have anything they would like to add on funding? I'm trying to get sort of a directional picture in terms of the first year and then subsequent years. I'm starting to see that. Ralph, you're next, please.
I think, as Catherine has mentioned, the heavy expense will be capital needs. And it sounds like a lot of the capital planning that would have initial expense is going to be taken care of by the end of this fiscal year. But those costs, especially for Park and Rec, need to be detailed so that they can interface with the overall 5-year plan of the town so that we can prioritize and make choices and present those choices to the people who actually pay the bill. Operationally, it's my understanding that this next year, we're going to be operating, at least as far as Park and Rec is concerned, without substantial fee revenue. So we need to assess, and we probably won't know until we analyze the outcome at the end of the next fiscal year, exactly what that has done in terms of impact to the mill rate. I think there was consensus on the board, if my memory serves, is that this is the best way to go for the town in terms of offering services and encourage more participation without asking people to reach into their pockets for something that many of them may already perceive as having already been paid for out of their tax dollars. So I think capital planning is key. I don't think operationally the lack of fee income is going to have a huge impact on the mill rate, but it certainly will make some level of difference. But again, we need to know what we want to do in terms of enhancements, what it will cost, and how we will phase it in when it's blended with other capital needs that the town has, and there are several at this point, some of them with big ticket numbers attached to them.
Other board members? Let's go ahead and just open it up to the public. Hannah, did you want to?
I'm actually the president of the rec board, so.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to speak up to the fact that I understand all the other committees work in a certain way. Rec supports itself with all the fees that we charge. Without programs running this year, obviously we haven't brought in any revenue for those programs. At the same time, people are starving for something to do, as you mentioned, with using the trails and all that stuff. Our big vision right now, and more of a focus, because we can't use any school facilities, which we've always been able to use. We can't even use the fields in soccer season. They wouldn't let us use those. So we now have to work on the field down here and develop it into more of a facility that is a rec facility if we are going to be locked out of school facilities that all of our taxes pay for. So that's a huge focus for us. I'm willing to do fundraising for it. I don't want to limit it to just a town budget. I want it to happen sooner rather than later. There are a lot of people on our rec Facebook page that were willing to help and jump in and do whatever needed to be done to help this happen. So I just want to put that out there that I understand a 5-year plan. I'd love to see the beach develop to more, but rec itself has a vision to work with you guys and try to make that complex into something more that's usable for everybody in town.
Anna, do you see some of the pandemic-driven part of this as being temporarily an incursion on your activities as a rec board? And I mean, for example, will we be able to go back to those school properties?
So this is Sean.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bruce, definitely we'll be able to go back to the school at some point. However, I think we're going to see that their use and their time, this is going to have an impact for a long time. You know, they're not, I don't think in any shape we're going to be rushing back to those facilities. I also think there was a clear line in the sand too to how we can support each other. And with the resources and the space that we have available, we should be maximizing it for the town, for whoever, you know, and making whatever opportunities grow, you know, if it's adult kickball leagues or whatever, that we can use that space. It doesn't have to be just for the kids on Saturday mornings, you know. So I think there's a lot that can be done there.
I want to be very specific for just 1 second on space, because it's important that the board hears if we're talking about what that space is. Are we talking about part of the recreational area that we have off the church road? Are we talking about the beach? Are we talking about a combination? I just want some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I
Church
think we're
Road
talking Church Road, and you know, we've thrown around the beach, upper field too. Like, what could that be, basketball or whatnot? We've had lots of conversations, but I think it's really church and beach when Rec's talking. Just the field area. That's really where we're concentrating. And we spent some time this summer looking over the previous plans for when the ball field was put in, you know, and all those surveys and stuff too. So, yeah.
There were two sports fields, I think, there in the original plan. Is that correct?
Three.
Okay. Marty, go ahead, please.
Hey, I'm going to speak just for the budget committee. You know, first, I like what Greg was saying about taking a bigger view of the quality of life and what the town can offer to bring people together and you know, enhance their enjoyment of being here. And I like what Catherine said about a 5-year plan. And I think the budget committee will do a better job in coming up with ways of funding things if it's presented with that 5-year plan. It's very difficult to do meaningful planning 1 year at a time. So to the extent that the budget committee can be given this this broad statement that these are the things that we would like to accomplish, for all those good reasons over the next 5 years, working with Eric, the budget committee can come up with a sort of an implementation of, the financial part of an implementation plan, rather than, oh, well, here's a little thing we want to do this year, and get that into the budget. We can be more help if we have a somewhat long-range plan and we can come back with, with ideas on how to get it into the budget. One other thing from the budget committee, some of the funding is not strictly coming from the taxpayers. It's, coming from outside, from wood harvesting. It's coming from grants. And those are things that also need a time horizon. I think, I think Jerry is in on the call. I think he can talk about the amount of work that went into getting a $30,000 grant for the town the year before last. And so that's another reason for coming up with this, fleshing out the vision. So it's not just, we would like to make this a better place. And this is how we want to do that. And when we want to do that, then the budget committee can help with ideas on when and how to fund things.
I think it's really important to go back and look at the people who assisted in building the original ball field. They're up on the sign down there, and approach they were, wonderful folks in town who have equipment, very much like what the Trails Committee does. People come together with their machinery and different equipment and they build things. And we could do that with things at the beach and things at the ball field. We have several contractors that might be willing to do part of the work as a donation and part for pay.
Well, Catherine, that's kind of where I think the important part of this group is. So Hannah and I and some others in our board, we've done some of that legwork. We know the people that are willing to come in with an excavator or, do whatever those parts to provide the resources and get some of that stuff moving as a community service and a donation of their time and resources. But it just seems that the conversations that each of the committees have to have with each other to cross X's and O's and whatnot, that's where I think that for us, I think that's where more of what's slowing us down more than budget. We actually feel we could do a lot of this without asking for more money.
And that 5-year plan is crucial.
So I hear that loud and clear. So what I would be willing to do is to go to the select board when they meet on Monday night, and we could just add this to the agenda. I know we did the agenda planning the other day, and ask them to authorize a member of the board to work directly with the 3 committee chairs to begin. I'm not going to say to develop a 5-year process, but to begin a discussion on what that might look like. And then, because they may need to go back to their various committees and get some feedback or whatever. And this way we can plug that thinking into the budget process. If a member of the budget committee would like to sit in on that, that would be great too, but that would be up to them. That's just something I've jotted down that we can discuss on Monday night. Are there any other items regarding, but did I see a hand, Bruce? Please, thank you.
I just wanted to add, it may be kind of early to add this, but when we were discussing the concepts of how we could work together, having an overseeing board would make sense to me. Keeping them separate makes sense to me too, because these groups do some very specific things that I think it's better to keep focus on by the individual groups. But what I would see when something big needs to be done is we develop a project, bring in people from all the groups on these specific projects, and in that way share the expertise, but keep the individuality of the boards and commissions. That's just something to think about. Just another way to go about it that you could think about. And I applaud the idea of getting more out of that field on Church Road. It'll be harder though than it was putting the baseball field. The baseball field took the best land and left the worst undeveloped. It'll cost more money to build flat and dry fields there. It can be done, but it's just going to cost more money. So.
Okay, great. Eric, I do know that you were going to mention a few budget thoughts. Do you still want to do that?
Yeah, I'll try to be as quick as I can on it. Let me, I'm just going to read off my my screen here. I've got, let me find it. Basically, I just wanted to point out that you talked about the revenue impacts. When I modeled those, I'm seeing that we're looking at about a $7,000 to $8,000 decrease in revenues for the beach. Right now, everything else is pretty much static. Our revenues normally for the beach are around $7,000 to $10,000, depending on the year. Last year, when we increased fees, we actually did a fantastic job of actually covering our costs for the first time in several years. We finally did catch up. But again, we were doing that as a stopgap to stop the losses before we switched over to a different model. So that worked. We do have pretty reliable numbers on the number of residents from out of town that are using the beach. And so I think we have a fairly good estimate that we'll have between $2,500 and $3,500 coming in from things like day passes from out-of-town residents, seasonal passes from out-of-town residents, and beach rentals, assuming that we're going to have probably a little bit of shrinkage in that with more local activity. So I think that we've got a pretty good estimate there of about $3,500. But again, that's a reduction of about $7,000 in revenue. Looking at the expense side, we have an increase in expenditures for the beach, again, being the primary area, because we do want to focus and have appropriate staffing. What we have in the budget this year currently in our draft is 400 hours each for an attendant position, which might be 2 people, and 40 hours a week for a beach superintendent position, which is that person that, or 400 hours total, basically 40 hours for 10 weeks with some stuff on the ends tailing off. And so that's a baseline coverage in my view, and we'll be discussing this more with the various groups, particularly with the rec board. But that basically gives us full coverage for the summer. And that's a good place to start. But that basically moves our expenditures up from about 8 or 9,000 for wages up to 12 or so to 13. And that's just for a basic beach position. If we were to add extra hours for other portions of the year or other activities like facilitating project management or facilitating community building efforts and things like that, or even grant solicitation, that would add some more cost. But the way it's looking right now with the beach anyway, I'm looking at about where was it? Let's see. About a $6,000 deficit on the, or increase on the expense side. So we have a roughly $6,000 increase on the expense side, roughly $7,000 decrease on the revenue side. So that the net impact, as Ralph said, is relatively small, $13,000. That's something like $4 or $5 per person in the town of Readfield to provide the beach without having a permit system. So that seems fairly reasonable from an overall perspective. But there are little nuances here and there. But the draft budget shows that kind of impact. And that includes some small funds for maintenance and working on the facilities that exist. That does not include any large capital projects, again, because the first phase of those, the electricity and redoing the picnic stations, that's going to happen this fiscal year. And the picnic stations, at least, I hope, can be done as one of those community type projects where we get people together and say, we've got 40 pieces of sheet metal and we've got some shingle scrapers. Let's do this on a Sunday or a weekend. But in any event, that's where the budget looks for the beach. Right now, our budgets for the other divisions in the department are all fairly static. I haven't coordinated with Rec on what their intentions are, but they've had a hard year with COVID, so I wouldn't expect a lot of change, but that's something we'll have to discuss. So that's really my budget summary on operating. Capital, I think that there are some wonderful projects that we could and should pursue. And I think that 5-year plan approach is a great idea. It's a good direction to go. And I think it'll feed well actually into the comprehensive planning process that's happening right now, which is really a 10-year plan for the town that's more, less specific. But those two things are going to work very well together. And I'll just say the last thing that I really do appreciate all the feedback and talk that I've heard about collaboration and people working together. And the folks on this call, majority of them are actually selected representatives from these various committees and boards. So I think this group in itself could continue to meet in the future and fulfill a function of helping to direct some of this activity. It's not always the chairs that have the time or the resources to make this stuff happen. So I kind of like this idea, but certainly there's lots of other models, and the whole idea is communication. If we're communicating and talking and sharing our vision and our ideas, we're going to find synergy and success. So I'm really happy to see that.
Thank you, Eric. Go ahead, Ralph, please.
In terms of budget development, Eric, I'm wondering whether or not it might be advisable to include some level of funding for site development, analysis, drainage, and what have you of the remaining land off of Church Road, so that we would know exactly what we're getting into if we chose to build other recreational fields there, so that for planning purposes down the road, you would at least have a ballpark number in mind for what it would take to get water out from underneath and where you would run it.
Thank you. So I think we'll wrap some of these discussions on the finance part into that 5-year planning with certainly some emphasis on 21 and 22 and some thought about the numbers that Eric was able to share with us. I do want to say that, this all needs to be taken within the frame of, I think, a challenging year budget-wise ahead. And the challenge is to be sensitive to taxpayers and to be very balanced in our approach on things. So there may be pieces that are likes that become pieces that are addressed in out years rather than in near years. And we'll discuss all those. That's part of this process. I'm just very focused on 21 and 22's budget. Again, being sensitive to, we don't know, for instance, how many people are unemployed is to some degree. And when I say that, to some degree, because that's somewhat the case, people have become underemployed during COVID or had a layoff of 12 weeks or something like that. They may be working now. So there may be some challenges within our population that we really need to consider and be sensitive to. So with that, I'd like to move on to policy operation considerations. I do try to keep us to the schedule. I'm very happy to go beyond 7:30 here, but we'll kind of I'll take the lead of the group on that. I don't know if we need to deeply get into policy or operational considerations, because particularly the operation is going to be quite driven, if you will, by that 5-year, and that could be a 4-year or a 7-year plan. We don't necessarily need to put the imprint of 5 on it specifically. So I think that'll kind of develop in conjunction operationally, those considerations. But are there policy or operational considerations that people were prepared to just at least talk about or ask questions about tonight? Well, please go ahead, Ron Swenson.
Thank you. The one thing I did want to mention, and I actually talked briefly at one of their recent meetings with the Conservation Commission about this, but I believe the town of Readfield needs to get back to thinking about conservation and open space land and the need for the town to perhaps look at investing in that, whether it's outright purchase or purchase of development rights for recreational or outdoor resources. So one of the things that I'm proposing in my draft budget for town property basically is the inclusion of money for a reserve for open space preservation. And open space being very broad. Could mean conservation land, could mean recreational resources. But the idea of a building like the Grange coming up, that might be a stretch, but it's a fantastic idea. And I mean, it connects directly to a town park behind the library. So there's oftentimes these things that come up that if we're not prepared to take advantage of it in some way, even if it's just putting some money down as a right of first refusal, these things can have value if we're able to act on them. So I'll just say I'm very much looking to, even though it is a tight year, start doing, I think, what we should have done several years ago, and start putting some money aside for open space and land.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can commit to that set aside in the upcoming budget. And so I just don't want, I don't want people to always be guessing where I am. Anybody else on policy or considerations? Yes, Catherine.
It's kind of policy, but also budget. Just in all honesty, the select board has talked either at workshop or in our meetings about the possibility of looking at various projects in town and bonding them similarly to how we did the fire station and the library. So there may be several projects that need to be done in a certain time frame, and the best way to do that might be to do 2 or 3 of them at one time with one funding mechanism, not saying what year that's going to happen in, rather than trying to do one project and pay for it while another one is completely falling apart. And so I think when people are putting together a 5-year plan, it's important to look at maybe there's something that you think needs to happen that it's a large capital outlay at first, but it could be paid for over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, rather than waiting 10 years to develop a sense of community. So I think we need to be really open-minded in how we approach this and just bring forth all the ideas we can.
I think that's a very good observation, Catherine. And I think one thing is in the CIP itself, we've been kind of focused on the current hard assets to a greater degree. And so there may be what I would call investment assets that we need to, in subsequent years, look at. But I do think, I think we do this in conjunction with the Budget Committee, I believe, usually when we do the capital investment plan overview. I do think we really do want to make sure that this voice, if you will, of the Parks and Rec is a consideration within that menu of choices and how we plan and when we bond and things and so forth. So I'm all for that. Do we want to talk a little bit about the beach access system? I do have some concerns. First of all, the concern is to honor the vote that the warrant article in June gave us, which was to make the beach public. I do think, and I'm not sure if we, you mentioned out-of-town folks, Eric. Do we actually take daily counts at the beach?
We do. I think it might take some time to pull them together, but we do it.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to do that,
We do have a record
or to get into specific numbers. I'm just, we have the capability of doing that, and so I think, that could be informative. And so even if we have some initial data, that'll be useful. My primary thing with the beach is to, like I said, ensure that we honor the ability, if you will, of people to go there, and at the same time to manage two restrictions we have, which is the parking limitation. We absolutely don't want to be parking on other people's property or up and down the road there. And the other limitation would perhaps be environmental in terms of how many people you put on the beach at any one time. So there will be some discussion, I would think, about what those thresholds are, and that may drive how we issue permits to people, I think. I've had one resident tell me that perhaps what we do is, every single member of the town has a beach pass for 5 visits or something like that in the initial year, and then maybe there's a sliding user fee for beyond that. And I know we've always honored usage levels that if there was an inability to pay, that we address those things, although some people won't say that they have that inability to pay. I know we have some group use, and we want to make sure that when we open the beach, the group use is probably codified some way in terms of some policy, so that yes, the beach is open to all residents, but that doesn't mean you bring the block party down of 75 people all at once, so that kind of thing. Any thoughts on the beach access? And I'm being mechanical here, so this is kind of the mechanics of how we do this. I mean, I think this is not going to be something the select board is going to make decisions on. We're going to leave this to the town manager and the beach people, the rec board. But I do think if we have any threshold ideas that people want to throw out on that, it's informative and helpful.
This is Sean.
Hi, Sean.
So I would say that, my initial thought and feelings is that we're not going to see a drastic influx of people that are now going to go to the beach because it's free. The people in town that love the beach pay for the beach already, and they've been the ones that have been actively going. I think the hopes for those people that have been buying beach passes for the last decades or whatever is that we will do a better job of having upkeep of the beach because we'll be more supported financially. I think that's really been a big downside to the beach in the 5 fun years I've had helping organize that. So I think that it's a difficult thing. I think that, knowing a lot of, I know many of you have been in town for much longer than me, but even historically when the beach was in its heyday, that it was very seldom, and we have a lot of records that Tom kept that show the volume and the passes and the daily counts and stuff. So there never even seemed to be a big concern. I know that there are state environmental laws that we'll have to check into about volume of people on the beach and in the water, but I think that we're going to have more concerns about lifeguarding or those kind of things more so than we will reaching capacity. So even in 2 years ago when we had that extremely hot summer, we had a lot more people buying day passes because they needed to get in the water, and they were paying to get in the water because it was so hot. Yep. So I think, that's going to be I don't think we're going to have more people trying to get in the water because it's free. So that's one side of it. I think another thing that, because you were talking about policy and considerations, I think a thing we're really missing is how our school system impacts this town, and how we can tap into those students and those projects that they need to be doing for their graduation, and why do we not have more buy-in in community projects from those folks? I know they do a few things here and there, but I feel like that is something that we vastly miss.
I'm always willing to figure out how we can extend that hand. Melissa, please. And you are muted, Melissa, and
Thank
no,
you.
you're not.
Sorry about that.
It's quite all right.
So Melissa Small, the librarian at Readfield Community Library. And just with regards to that last point, so we've had, as everybody has had some restrictions in terms of programming that we have been able to do. And at the library, we have found, first of all, the beach and also the trails to be invaluable for what we've been able to offer. We've always had a summer story time for young kids and their caregivers, but this year, because of COVID, we extended that all the way to the end of October, and it was fantastic. It was a wonderful place for grandparents and their kids, their grandkids or parents to come and be with us every week. And so the beach was, that's part of the reason that I'm here tonight, is just because I want to throw out to everybody that that the library, although the library is somewhat disconnected from, the parks and recreation, I also think, healthy body, healthy brain, they all go together. And I want to just throw out there that we would love to, as the library, if there's any way that we can be collaborative with what's going on, we would love to do so. One other thing, and especially in this time of COVID, because I think our outdoor spaces are going to be so crucial, continuing to go forward for the foreseeable future. The thing I wanted to mention is that we just recently received a grant. We had a story walk on the trail behind the library a couple of months back, and we wrote a grant to be able to install a more permanent story walk, both at the Readfield Elementary School and behind the library on the trail there. And so we wrote a grant, we got some money, and it's not a lot of money, but we reached out to the Maranacook Community High School and asked them, would their shop program be willing to help us build the posts for the signs. We reached out to Kent Hill School, to their woodshop program. Both schools are so excited about this project, to be helping the town and to be helping with the project. And so they've been on break, and we're just going to get going with them on this. But I just want to throw out there that I do think if they're asked, I think they'll do it. So when things come up, they were very receptive. The principal, everybody was very receptive to these projects. And so I think that could be the same with what you're looking at for different projects at the beach or whatever. I think if they're asked, they could become a big part of it. So, and I think it's important to involve these young people if we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I think we got some good ideas out there on beach access. My primary driver, and I want to be very clear on this, is that I want to see the usage of the beach. People voted to make it free and supported it for the town, so usage is very important to me. There may be high-low hours or different ways that we can manage people at the beach, and maybe Sean's completely right, and that we won't be overwhelmed. But I do hope we see more use of the beach. That's kind of the goal, if you will, of opening it up. And maybe that use is different over more time, with more people picnicking in the evening, for example. I'm not a beach pass holder, I'm ashamed to say. I certainly was when my children were young, obviously by my hair. They're in their 30s now. In any case, I'd love to go down there and have a picnic in the evening. That's a great idea. With that in mind, I hope that was informative to folks who will be discussing and kind of planning how to manage the beach access. It is going to be free and available to residents. Sean, I'm going to let you go ahead and say something, and then I'm going to wrap up the meeting unless there are board members that have anything to say. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say lastly, I just think that the changing rooms is something that can't wait 5 years, the floors and stuff. I think Melissa's name's still on them, Bruce. So, you know, I think they definitely all need they need some work. And so for families and people to come to have a clean space to do something, I think it's something we really got to take some serious looks at.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. Are there any board members who would like to say anything as we wrap up? Catherine, please.
I have one question. I am
Sure.
unmuted. Right. Eric, what is the date of our capital planning meeting with the budget committee and the select board? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I got it right here. Let me look here. Capital.
Did you see how wide his hands went? That was incredible.
I'm a fair skinned guy, Bruce. You don't got to rub it in. It's let's see. So we have community capital planning is on February 25th.
So I think it's really important that we try in our meeting on Monday when we discuss this and form whatever the committee was that you stated, Bruce, which I'm fully supportive of, that we let those folks know, especially Sean and Hannah, because of their involvement in rec, that if they can get whatever they've already put together to us prior to then, that would be really useful because it at least gives us an initial place to jump off from. And if there are needs, like the basketball court has to be this year, the changing rooms have to be this year. No, the basketball court could be 2 or 3 years. You know, that kind of thing so that we can help to try and move things along, maybe not with jumping in completely, but we just needed that date. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, so to close this out, the board is always, the select board is always welcoming feedback, and please plug into the budget process. I know I'm talking to a lot of people who are the super volunteers in town, so I really appreciate you all being here and being so involved. You know, I don't necessarily see the group that we're going to talk about Monday night being a quote-unquote committee, but I see it as a working planning group just to get us started and directionally kicked off, if you will. So with that, I appreciate everybody coming. If anybody is interested in boring television, this will be recorded. It'll be posted on the town website. I do know some people did want to review it afterwards that weren't able to be here this evening. Thank you all for coming.